Hello everyone, welcome back to On Point Politics, and today we're going to be looking at the electoral map and where the race stands as of right now. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you can stay in tune with the #1 stop for all things polling and election analysis in the United States. Now guys, just to make it very frank with you, we have created our own polling average for the 2024 race. So we will not be using RCP. We're not going to be using 538's averages. We are not using that anymore. We are going to be using the average that me and Gold Crown Politics developed, because I want to take this channel to the extra step and I really want to try to get in this industry, proving to everybody that I'm going to be more accurate than everybody else. And the problem is you have these bad faith actors like G. Elliott Morris, Nate Silver, all these people that will say one thing is going to happen, and then when the thing happens, they're like, oh, it actually doesn't matter, or they don't have their model released yet. For whatever reason, I don't know what 538's doing. I don't know what fundamentals they're cooking up to somehow have Harris within 3 in Ohio, but it's ridiculous. And the polling right now is just abysmal. The polling is awful. Now, when we look at the average, right, today, we did actually add 2 more pollsters. We added Redfield and Wilton Strategies, and we also added RMG Research because they actually have been polling somewhat consistently this cycle. So I thought I might as well add them in the average. And when we calculated their weights, right now, Trump did lose some ground from yesterday. Yesterday he was at 46.1% to Harris's 44.3%. But again, we did add 2 more pollsters today. And there was a new Economist YouGov poll that just dropped that basically boosted Harris about a point in that average. And there's a couple of polls tomorrow that are going to start falling out of the average. So we're going to go back a month or so in the average. That's kind of how we're going to do it in terms of updating the average. We're going to go back a month. And what's interesting is we have a slightly different grading system for polls. We grade based on the margin of error from 2020, the sample size. We also grade on the electorate that they have in their samples. So the higher, the closer their electorate is to a tight electorate, the higher score they get. And they get graded on the sample type. So they get an extra point if they are a likely voter screening. And when all those scores are calculated, they're all summed up, and then the weights are applied to each poll, and they're all added up, and we get the final averages. Kennedy did not move from yesterday. West dropped about 0.1%. Stein is at roughly about the same. Undecideds did go down. Harris did gain, and Trump did go up, but undecideds ultimately went below 4% as of today. Tomorrow, we are getting the weekly Rasmussen poll, and that'll probably change up the average a bit. And my inclination is that Harris is probably going to take the lead in the average tomorrow. The race was never, at this point in time, it wasn't a, Trump plus 4 or 5 point lead anymore, but it's not Harris plus 3.5 like 538 wants to claim. They give New York Times/Siena, which has a historical, like you could literally look at it here. New York Times Siena, yes, we include them, but they had a Biden +9 margin, and they only have 1 poll in the current aggregate. They're not going to have a high rating. I mean, they have a C rating right now. Redfield and Wilton has a D rating right now. Their poll was pretty off back in 2020. The 2 worst polls on here are actually Harvard-Harris, which is pretty interesting. We couldn't really find their sample size, so we could type in here, just assuming they have a sort of a sample size. Maybe they're at like, let's say 500 to be fair, but even still, well, actually, you know what? We'll give them like 15,000 to play it fair. Even then, the average is still the same. The average doesn't really move much. I mean, undecideds moved like a tiny bit down, but the average doesn't really move much. Trump is still at 45.5%. Harris is at 45.2%. There's about 3.6% of the electorate undecided. Now, Kennedy is seemingly going to drop out of the race and endorse former President Trump. And usually what averages do is they'll be like, okay, once a candidate drops out, we're going to just cut off we're going to cut them off of the aggregate completely and only include polls that don't have them. But The reason why we're going to include him in the aggregate is because I want to actually track what happens over time, because clearly if we look at the average and as he goes to zero, if like Trump takes like a 2 or 3 point lead in the average, that's going to be pretty good, because more than likely you're going to have a sort of aggregate that may possibly show that Trump did gain back support from Kennedy. Or if Harris goes up, we'll be able to basically prove that Trump was actually being helped by Kennedy in the race. It depends, but we're going to leave him in the average. And as those polls fall out of the average, we'll see where that support kind of diverts. Both of their national votes are going to go up. And I hope that the polling industry still polls West and Stein, because I do also expect them to gain a little bit from Kennedy dropping out. Not that much, just a tiny bit, but I'd say about a half a point max for both of them. I think they're going to gain, with some third-party voters that may still vote third-party regardless. Now, looking at this, undecideds obviously dipped down. They're both at about 45%. Now, we actually tested the 2020 aggregate. We got a series of polls, and we basically did this exact same thing for 2020. And we show Biden at 50.8% nationally. And that's pretty close to what he got. He got 51.1. However, our Trump numbers, it's just the polling is so bad in 2020. We can't get an aggregate that has him above 45%. We were trying to play around with how we grade or weigh the scores. It's just so bad that we literally cannot have him at 45%. Like, it's just not going to happen. And so this aggregate does have Biden ahead by 8.4%, which is a huge underestimation of Trump. But we are going to see, when we look at certain data and whatnot, what we may possibly do is we may go back to these numbers and actually kind of adjust for the electorate. We may possibly do that. Me and Goldcrown are kind of still debating on whether we're doing that, because we have implied a grading system on the electorate, but we may actually have to reweigh the numbers ourselves to get a more accurate electorate, because clearly Trump is down by 8 points nationally here, and clearly he gets a pretty large amount of the undecideds. He gets a fairly large amount of undecided voters there, and it's pretty interesting because Biden's favorability was around this and Trump's favorability was pretty close to this number. So it's pretty interesting that both candidates were at their favorabilities here. Even Harris right now actually is at her favorability number, give or take. I mean, right now, I believe if we actually look at RCP, which I'm not using their national aggregate, I am going to look at their favorability numbers. Harris is still at 45.5%. And for the incumbent candidate, her being the incumbent vice president, these tend to be better indicators, especially for incumbent presidents, of the national vote share that they're going to get, especially their job approval. That's really what you're looking at. And if we actually look up Harris's job approval, I wonder if they actually stopped polling that, which I think was a bad idea. But we see 45.5%, and what is she at here? Around 45.2%. Now, is Trump going to stay at 45.5%? No way. There's no way that's going to happen, because he himself in 2016 and 2020 has never gotten below 46% ever. He actually was polling at his 2016 numbers literally yesterday at 46.1%. Adding those two new pollsters and throwing in that new poll into the aggregate did kind of swing the aggregate quite a bit, because that pollster is rated pretty high in our weighting system, because they have a lot of polls in the aggregate right now. They actually outnumber the amount of Rasmussen polls, but Rasmussen will pretty much match them tomorrow, and I think there's some polls we're going to have to kind of clean out of the aggregate, so that's going to be fairly interesting as well. But clearly we see that the former president, I mean, it's a tied race, and they're both sitting at about 45% right now, and there's still a couple undecideds to go. But assuming that the electorate is tied, it's unfathomable that there's people out there saying, oh, Florida's a toss-up. Oh, North Carolina's a toss-up. North Carolina is probably going to go to Trump at this point, because hasn't really trended that much to the left the past few years. And it's gone to him twice. And if he's doing about 8 points better on net than what he was doing before, Because remember, our aggregate has Biden up by 8.4% in 2020. Just to give you an idea. He's up by 8.4. So right now, Trump being up by 0.3, he's literally performing 8 points better nationally compared to the previous aggregate. And so if there's going to be an 8-point shift nationally, he may be up by 4.5 points at the end of the day, which that's not a guarantee, but based on the net swing from how the polling is looking, that's what it seems to be the case. And even if the popular vote is tied at face value, I can't see the former president losing the election, because right now there are states that are trending too hard to the right for Harris to end up winning, especially the Harris does not have white working class appeal at all. That's the problem. She does not have white working class appeal to the point where she's going to be able to reverse some trends in the Rust Belt for Democrats. It's not going to happen. Now, we do look at Colorado, probably a likely state. Oregon, the same thing. Maryland, Massachusetts, obviously. Connecticut, Rhode Island, Delaware, New Jersey will be in the likely column, as well as Washington. Iowa is possibly safe, including Ohio, Texas, and Florida are still in the, upper, double-digit range, anywhere from 12 to 15 points or so, especially Florida. I mean, this is how bad the polling is going to be. I think the polling this year is going to be absolutely abysmal. I think it's going to be far worse than even 2020 is, because people are having like D+5 electorates in Wisconsin in their polling, when the electorate in Wisconsin in 2020 was R+5. So it's like your electorate is 10 points off of the previous election, and Republicans have net registered voters in every single state except Colorado. So how are you going to tell me that the electorate in Wisconsin is going to shift 10 points to the left, while Republicans have basically been gaining everywhere nationwide, essentially? And so with Florida, to go about the bad polling, FAU, out of all people, the university in basically a little bit north of Miami, they had Trump up by 3. That's the biggest joke I've ever heard in my life. We just had the primary yesterday. Republicans were 51% of the electorate. 51%. Democrats were 37% of the electorate. That's an R+14 electorate. This is me being generous to Harris, by the way, because really, is she going to win independents in Florida? No, she's not going to win independents in Florida, but the electorate's R+14. I have Trump winning Florida by 10 to 15 points. Realistically, he probably wins it by more than that. That's why I'm saying do not get excited about Florida when you see it on election night and you see these crazy results where Trump's up in Miami-Dade by 5 or 6. Don't get excited, because Florida has already been trending to the right, and it's going to trend heavily to the right again. It's going to trend even more to the right. Hispanics are going to be a crucial part of Trump's coalition this cycle. He's going to do very well with them. He's probably going to get around in the mid-40s with them. Now, what's interesting is he's probably going to gain with rural white voters, but lose ground with suburban white voters. And this is going to create a weird electoral map, because New York falls under the 15-point category. It's probably a 12 to 15-point race. Donald Trump improves in the rurals. He also improves in inner city areas, but he's probably going to do worse in suburban areas. However, the shift is going to be big enough to still have New York under 15 points. Alaska, this state's been trending to the left unbelievably been trending to the left. It's probably not going to be under 10, but it's definitely going to be within that 12 to 15 point range, despite the popular vote even being tied to R+5, because that's the range we're working with right now. I mean, if Harris were to, even if Harris, just to give you an idea, even if Harris won all the undecided voters, she would barely be almost cracking 49%. That's not even a guarantee that she wins the election, by the way. That doesn't even guarantee her the Electoral College, because the rural areas are going to trend to the right again. And so she may need to win the popular vote by upwards of 5 points to even win the Electoral College. So Just because she's leading in the popular vote is not the end of the world, and she is not leading the average by 3 or 1.5. It's ridiculous. These people at 538 are giving New York Times Siena, which has these crazy samples, an A+ rating, but Rasmussen, that actually had just as bad state numbers, but ended up having a really good national aggregate. For whatever reason, we have to kick them off. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Now, when we do state averages, we are going to grade pollsters individually by state. So not every single pollster is going to have the same grade across different states, because some pollsters have been more accurate. Like, it's just the truth. And looking at Illinois, probably under 15 if Trump is even tied in the popular vote right now. Really? I mean, yeah. And it's not going to be D+15 if he's even tied in the popular vote. North Carolina, probably a 6 to 7 point win for him. And early voting starts very soon. So we'll get data out of there not that long from now. Really. Georgia, this one's tough because it's trending to the left. Do I think it's going to trend 4 points to the left like how some YouTubers have it, where for whatever reason Georgia is till R with North Carolina till R in the same video? Let's talk elections, who is a paid shill. No, that's not going to happen. The fact that he has them both till tells me he doesn't understand anything about state trends. Because if he actually understood state trends, he would know that North Carolina is going to vote to the right of Georgia. Like, it's just seriously, like, it's so annoying when he has both North Carolina and Georgia tilt while Harris is winning the popular vote by 3 points. It's like, seriously? So North Carolina, even though it hasn't trended anywhere for the past 3 cycles, is going to magically trend 2 points to the left, but Georgia only trends 1 point? That literally makes no sense at all. And just to let you know, Nate Cohen from New York Times, they released a map of their polling from Georgia and North Carolina, like a dot map. They're not even polling any Republicans from the rural areas, and Trump is even still leading some of these polls. Trump's still ahead in the poll, and they're not even looking at Republicans in rural areas. Literally all the rural dots are a bunch of Democrats. So I'm telling you guys, the polling is going to suck this year. It's going to be bad. That's why I created my own polling average, because these people don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. They also don't understand how much demographics can really change an electorate. Like, everybody gets stuck in the same conventional thinking. This is why a bunch of people had Florida as till R in 2020, when it should have been very obvious, looking at the data, looking at state trends, that Florida would have been a lean R state, especially that it is a favorable incumbent state. Main second is probably going to be safe for Donald Trump. Looking at the rest of the swing states, New Mexico is going to be a 1 to 5 point race. Donald Trump is going to do better with Hispanics by about 15 points minimum. He's going to improve the net margin by a pretty decent amount. Is he going to get an outright majority of them? I'm not sure. It's possible Harris still wins them nationwide, but I think he's going to get fairly close. I think New Mexico's probably a 1 to 5 point victory right now, possibly in the 3 to 4 point range for Kamala Harris, and I do expect the state to trend about 2 to 3 points to the right this cycle. Now, Minnesota, again, telling you she's going to gain with suburban white voters, and that's a lot of Hennepin County where the BLM riots were, and those people, basically, they can't save themselves. Their city burned to the ground in 2020, and they swung left. Like, there's no saving them. But Harris probably holds on to Minnesota by about a point or two, kind of similar to what Hillary Clinton won it by in 2016, somewhere around that margin as of right now. That is my guesstimate there. Looking at New Hampshire and Maine, this is interesting because I'm not sure if Harris is actually appealing here. Like, I can't legitimately think if she's appealing to these voters in New Hampshire, in Maine at large. She's very comparable to Hillary Clinton, but Hillary Clinton had basically was the first lady, and on top of that actually had some political experience. I mean, Kamala Harris basically did some questionable things to get to the top, but it's like, is she really going to win Maine at large in New Hampshire by these crazy margins? Maybe Maine is trending to the left, and maybe it's like a 2-point win, but I don't even know what's going to happen in New Hampshire. And again, people in the comments, oh, but the polling in Maine, it's a 10-point. Oh, there's a new poll. She's winning by 17 points. Guys, the state polling is garbage. The state polling is horrible. Like, I cannot explain to you how bad the state polling is. This is why I wanted to make my own national average, because I was tired of seeing how the mainstream media pundits are giving these pollsters who are pushing push polls to make Harris look better A ratings. It's ridiculous. It is ridiculous. And then the way people attack Rasmussen. Rasmussen right now is the best pollster in the industry, period. Not only do they poll on multiple issues, they look at all the races, they look at Senate races, they look at how certain demographics break perfectly, they weigh properly, they have a realistic electorate. So that I think they weigh by about D+2. So that's a fairly realistic electorate, right? Not only that, they actually poll on whether their respondents are not U.S. citizens. And I know that sounds dumb, because it's like, okay, you're taking a poll of, U.S. likely voters, right? About 4% in their latest poll had basically said they weren't U.S. citizens. 4%. Either they're lying to him or there's some actual credibility to that. And what's funny is the people that said that they're not U.S. citizens and that they are planning on voting are actually breaking to Trump by over 20 points. So it's kind of interesting, and this is a suspicion I had, because I found it really hard to believe that Harris or Biden were going to win the lion's share of voters that were illegals, right? And it seems to me like my hypothesis is that a lot of the fraud, or at least a lot of the illegal votes, are actually already taken into account in some of the polling. I mean, really, Biden's percentage was basically spot on in 2020. Trump's was underestimated. That's what we had. Now, looking at these swing states, Nebraska's second with Harris. I don't think it goes to her. I think Trump narrowly picks it off. It's gonna be a dogfight there, but I think he gets it. Arizona, I think he wins Arizona by 3 to 4. Somewhere around there, similar to Georgia. I think he gets it by 3 to 4. He's going to flip back Maricopa County. He's going to do well in some of the exurban areas. Nevada, I actually see it as over a 5-point win, especially if he's tied in the popular vote. I think he's going to win it by over 5, because you have this Clark County here where Hispanics are trending to the right like ridiculously crazy. Trump even moved that county to the right in 2020. Nevada actually moved a decimal point to the right in 2020. It is the only major swing state that actually moved to the right, or basically didn't move Democrat at all. So there is a possibility that Trump just ends up outright winning Nevada by like 5 to 6 points, more than likely. Now, New Hampshire, I'd say it's a dogfight. I think it's going to go down to the wire, but I'd say it still goes for Harris, because you have a lot of Boston, Massachusetts liberals. You have a lot of Boston liberals that have kind of moved to New Hampshire, and the electorate there is a little iffy. However, I do think that it's going to be a dogfight there. I think it's going to be really close, but I do think it's going to narrowly go to Harris. I think it narrowly goes to Harris right now. Now, with Wisconsin, I have a hot take about this. I think that Wisconsin is probably going to be over a 5-point victory for Trump. Now, a lot of people in the comments are going to go at me, oh, there's no way, that's impossible. How is that even going to happen? Oh, you're no. Number one, the electorate there was R+5 in 2020. They had an R+5 electorate that cycle. And Trump, with these kind of voters, is going to improve. And Harris doesn't have any white working class appeal. She does not have this. She does not have the appeal to workers who have had their jobs shipped away in the Midwest. She doesn't have the appeal to these kind of workers, how they even interact with their friends on a day-to-day basis. She does not relate to these people. And so she's going to do horrible in the driftless area. She probably regresses in the wow counties. There may be a county or two where she improves, but that's about it. I think Trump is probably on track to win it by maybe 6-7 points right now. I think the polling there is going to be abysmal. And it's actually funny because if you look at the state polls right now for Wisconsin, if you look at a lot of their averages, Trump and Harris are like either Harris is up by 1 or 2 or they're tied. And the state is notorious for horrible polling errors of like 7 to 8 points against Trump. So if you were to take those averages at face value, anywhere from like a 4 to 8 point victory for Trump would be on the horizon simply looking at the polling errors from the past few cycles. So it's all lining up. Michigan, I think, would go to Trump by around 2 to 3. I think he's probably going to not perform that well in the suburban areas, but I think he's going to run it up in rural Michigan. I think he's going to do better in Detroit. That gives him the lean categorization. Pennsylvania, I think it's around 3 to 4 as well. I think Trump is probably going to improve in northeastern Pennsylvania. Scranton Joe, Joe Biden was able to LARP as this, working class man from Pennsylvania, even though he was only there for like 2-3 years of his life. And he was able to kind of take that and actually do somewhat well in northeastern Pennsylvania. And I think Trump's going to improve there. I think he's going to flip Bucks County. I think he's going to flip Erie back. I think he's going to improve statewide overall. And he's going to improve in Philadelphia. So he's going to probably win that easily. Now, Virginia is the final state on this map. Now, everyone's going to be like, why do you have his toss-up? The reason why is because we just got a poll recently from there, right? And it's Harris +3. Now, we've had polling about a month ago from Virginia pretty frequently. Actually, Harris was down in a lot of the polling. To give you a lot of context for this, Virginia elected a Republican governor in 2021. He's been fairly solid on the issues. He has over a 60% approval rating there. And he currently just passed a law that requires paper ballots only in Virginia when you go vote. So it's like, is it really going to be a sleeper flip? Like, Harris was only up 3 and the poll was spot on in 2020. I'd say it probably goes to Harris right now, but it may be one of these states where it's like sleeper close. Like, it depends. Maybe it's in the 1 to 2 point range. Like, it could be lean, but it may possibly end up being a flipper state, a sleeper state, especially if right now the polling is tied, the aggregate's tied nationally. If Trump is tied in the popular vote, this is definitely in the cards right now. And the truth of the matter is, Trump is not going to get 45.5% of the electorate. He's going to get higher than that. He's going to get higher than the number we have him at right now. He's going to do better than this. He's never gotten below 46.1%, which is what he was actually polling at yesterday. And I expect our aggregate to underestimate him now. Harris's numbers are a little bit intriguing. We'll see where those go. And right now she's polling around her job approval. And in order for her to win the Electoral College, she'd basically have to win all of the undecideds and then take some Trump votes from the average right now. Just to give you a picture, a crystal clear picture of the election right now. And so, guys, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you want more content from your #1 stop for all things polling and election analysis in the United States. Do not listen to the mainstream media. Do not listen to these people. Listen to me. Listen to me instead. Everyone, have a great rest of your day. Get some rest. Have a great night, everybody.